Everyone, I'm going to call to order our meeting of the Regional Transportation Committee for Tuesday, November 19th, 2024. Is there anyone here that would like to offer public comment? And none online, so we will go ahead and continue on with agenda item number 3. This is our summary of the meeting from October 15th. Has everyone had a chance to review those? Are there any corrections? Not, we will go ahead and approve those, the summary of that meeting. We'll move into action items. And Cam, I'm sorry. I'm being told we have a quorum to proceed, correct? Okay, so the first action item is the Transportation Improvement Program Policy Amendments, and our presenter this morning is Josh Schwenk, Senior Planner with DRCOG. Good morning, Josh. You're going to be with us for 3 action items.
Good morning, yes, that is correct. Let me get this pulled up. I believe it is this one. Okay, so just to put this into a little bit of context, you will notice there are 2 sets of amendments to the Transportation Improvement Program on your agenda, just due to the way that meeting schedules fell. The Transportation Advisory Committee has met twice since the last meeting of the RTC, and they have approved or recommended 2 sets of amendments, so both of those are now on your agenda for today's meeting. So this is the set that was approved at their October meeting. The first amendment is the addition of 3 pool projects to the CDOT Region 4 surface treatment pool. This includes adding $10,030,000 in state surface treatment funding and $1,761,000 in state cost escalation funds. One of these 3 projects for State Highway 7 also is receiving $2 million in state ADA funding, so that's being added in the second project on your list to the CDOT Region 4 ADA pool. Next, we have a couple of federal discretionary awards. So the City of Aurora received $10.8 million in federal PROTECT funding for their Box Elder Creek project, and the City of Boulder received $23,032,000 in federal Safe Streets and Roads for All, or SS4A funding, for a Safe Streets project. So with that, happy to take any questions on any of those. Otherwise, I do have a proposed motion available for you.
Questions? Good morning. Any questions at all about this? Any discussion? If not, the chair would entertain a motion. Motion made by Shelley Cook and seconded by Darius Pakbaz. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? We don't have anybody online, correct? Okay, great, then that passes. Thank you, Josh.
Thank you.
We'll move right into attachment C, which is amendments to the 2024-2027 Transportation Improvement Program, the second set.
Thank you. So this was the set approved by the TAC actually at their meeting yesterday afternoon. So the first 2 projects on this list are both related to some funding that was returned by the City of Englewood back to the Arapahoe County Subregional Forum. Ordinarily, according to our TIP policy, we would reach out to project sponsors on the forum waitlist. The Arapahoe waitlist only had 2 projects listed, and those both declined the funding. So this left us in a little bit of an odd situation, as our TIP policy doesn't explicitly state what we do in this situation when the waitlist is exhausted. The Arapahoe Forum did meet, and they asked for any projects that were currently funded in the TIP, which had cost increases due to additions or changes in their scope, and these 2 projects were ultimately recommended by the Forum. So it would be the addition of $3,390,000 to Littleton's Mineral and Santa Fe project and $2 million to Centennial's Arapahoe Side Path project. As part of our proposed motion, you will notice we are asking just for a one-time exception to our TIP policy, since this process was sort of outside of what is explicitly stated in the TIP policy. Next, we do have 3 additional federal discretionary awards. So CDOT Region 4 is receiving $11,539,000 in infra funds for their US 287 safety improvements. You'll notice the scope here lists that it runs to the Larimer-Boulder County line. The full project does run all the way to the Wyoming border, but this is the portion within the DRCOG region. Next, we have the $23.8 million in federal protect funds to the city of Golden for their Lena Gulch resiliency project, and then $4 million in protect funds to Denver for their Sanderson Gulch project. So again, happy to take any questions on any of those. Otherwise, I do have a proposed motion, and I will call your attention again to our request for that one-time exception to the TIP policy.
Questions? Comments? All right, so I'm looking for a motion to recommend to the Board of Directors the attached project amendments to the 2024-2027 TIP, including an exception to the TIP policy to allow the Arapahoe County Subregional Forum action. I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Motion was made by Director Wheel and second was by Director Whitlow. All in favor, please say aye. 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 Any opposed? Thank you very much. We're going to move on to attachment D in your packet. These are amendments to the policies for fiscal year 24-27 Transportation Improvement Program set-aside programs.
All right, you all are almost done with me. One more item that I have here. So back in March of 2023, the board did adopt a policy document that covers the policies for all of our various set-aside programs as part of our transportation improvement program. This really created a kind of one-stop shop. Anyone that was interested in our funding programs could reference that document, find information on eligibility, scoring criteria, et cetera, for each of our programs. Knowing that each of our programs operates independently, we would likely have to amend this in the future. This is the first amendment to that document that we are bringing forward. Really, since the time that that document was adopted, we've had several changes. So we have adopted a new TDM strategic plan, which is going to impact the scoring criteria around our TDM set-aside. We were able to successfully pilot our transportation corridor planning and community-based transportation planning programs through funding in our Unified Planning Work Program before moving those into the TIP set-aside program. So we got some experience there. We've also successfully finished development of IGAs with CDOT for each of our 4 new set-aside programs. So there was a little bit of a shift in how those programs were thought out through the development of those IGAs. We also, of course, have the new state accessibility rule. So there's just a few changes related to what is required to be listed on the website, making that a little bit more flexible, knowing that it can be difficult to ensure all of those products are always fully accessible. And then just some general refinement of eligibility criteria, scoring criteria, and weighting throughout each of our various programs. We did bring the full set of changes to the Transportation Advisory Committee at their August meeting. We received some feedback from them, went back and made some minor revisions based on what we heard from them, and then brought the full set again through their October meeting when we received their recommendation. So we're now bringing it forward to you today. Happy to take any questions, comments about any of the proposed changes. Otherwise, again, I do have a proposed motion available for you.
Any questions? No questions this morning. Everybody's just so compliant. We're all tired after the election. Is that what it is? Yeah. Okay, I'm looking for a motion to recommend to the Board of Directors the attached amendments to the policies for 24-27 Transportation Improvement Program set-aside programs.
Second.
We have a motion from Director Silverstein and a second from Executive Director Johnson. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Josh. And now we're going to be getting some informational items, some discussion items. Item number 7, 2050 MetroVision Regional Transportation Plan, the major update kickoff. And we have Alvin Badal Sanchez, RTD, Regional Transportation Planning Program Manager. Alvin, good morning.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. I'm actually going to be kicking us off with a video, so we'll go ahead and get that started before I do too much of an intro into the RTP. But this is related to one of our core products that we do here at DRCOG, related to our MPO function.
Very nice video. We're using drones so much more now. What is that?
All right, so I wanted to start us off with that video. Maybe to wake us up a little, I have not had my coffee yet this morning, so apologize for any yawns that you might see while I'm up here. But we wanted to kick us off with an update to our 2050 Regional Transportation Plan. This is our major 4-year update that we do. This is one of our federal requirements as the Metropolitan Planning Organization for the Denver region. And so we lead this effort every 4 years, and in between we do provide some opportunities to amend the plan. Those who have been with DRCOG for a bit, you'll recognize a version of this graphic in terms of our planning process, our planning structure. MetroVision is our guiding document for the region. It's our shared vision for the future. And one way that we implement MetroVision is through our regional transportation plan. There are two components to our RTP. There's our MetroVision vision part. What do we need in the region over the next 20 to 30 years? And then there's our fiscally constrained regional transportation plan. What can we actually afford over the next 20 to 30 years? And then just as the Regional Transportation Plan implements MetroVision, we also have our Transportation Improvement Program that we just touched on that implements the RTP. Some of these were touched on in that video, so I will just emphasize a few of those or touch on ones that might not have been highlighted. But this is a multimodal vision for the future. If you do open up our Regional Transportation Plan, you're going to see all the different ways people walk, bike, roll, move through our region, as well as how freight and goods move through our region. It is fiscally constrained, so there are a significant number of investments in the region over the next 20 to 30 years. Those are all investments that we believe can be achieved with the funding that's available in the region over the next 20 to 30 years. An important component related to the Transportation Improvement Program is that any roadway capacity or transit capacity project does have to be in the Regional Transportation Plan first before it can be funded through the Transportation Improvement Program. And then, like I've mentioned, we do it every 4 years. We develop it with all of our partners, CDOT, RTD, the Regional Air Quality Council, E470, toll authorities, our local member governments, so everyone in the region that has a stake in the transportation network. Like I mentioned, we do an update every 4 years. That's based on our air quality designation as a region. In between, we do provide opportunities to amend the plan, what we call cycle amendments. The Regional Transportation Plan that we're updating now was originally adopted in September of 2022. That was to meet the state's greenhouse gas planning standard requirements, and we most recently amended it in May of this year. So we have been discussing the RTP for a number of years now. The Regional Transportation Plan rolls up all the different work that's being done in the region. It's not just DRCOG's priorities, it is the region's priorities. So we look at what are some of the plans, policies, documents, processes that are currently in place at our federal level, the state level, as well as our regional partners, CDOT, RTD. There are a number of new plans that are in place now in the region that we'll be leaning on for this effort. And then there are those that we've had for a number of years that we always lean back on and build our vision and needs for the document to help determine project prioritization and our policy statements in the document. There are a number of different project types in the Regional Transportation Plan. The top two I already touched on need to be in our plan, roadway capacity and rapid transit capacity projects. We've always included these in the plan. We always will. It's one of our requirements. But the next four, we added a little more explicitly this last major update cycle based on our scenario work that we did. So now if you open up our plan, you're going to see safety projects, active transportation projects, freight and corridor planning projects in ways that we hadn't typically portrayed them before. They were always in our plan, but maybe more as buckets. Programs of funding. Now you can actually go to a line on a map, a row in a spreadsheet, and see projects that are specifically safety or freight in the region. Last major update, we identified 6 investment priorities: multimodal mobility, freight, active transportation, safety, air quality, and regional transit. These came out of what we were hearing from our stakeholder and public engagement. One we actually added based on Transportation Advisory Committee feedback was a freight priority. So these we built along the way as we heard what the priorities were through our public and our stakeholder engagement during the last major 2-year process. In addition to identifying those investment priorities, we then tagged investment to each of those. So there is investment all across our 10-county region. It varies from new programs like our Regional Bus Rapid Transit Program, $1.2 billion of funding in the RTP going to a regional BRT program. Our new safety program showing about $550 million. So new investment, tagging that investment and showing how we're putting money where our priorities are as a region. And so we were able to tag those and show those across the region. Like I mentioned, we just did a amendment cycle to the RTP, so it might feel like we've been discussing the Regional Transportation Plan for quite a bit now. That's because we started a cycle amendment process in September of last year that concluded in May of this year. We got federal approval in July of this year, and we started conversations on how we would update the RTP in August internally this year. And so now we are here before y'all, and we've started with our committees, and we'll address the board later this week on our kickoff for the next major 4-year update. This one is due in the winter of 2026. We're planning to take 2 years to update the regional transportation plan. It still will address all of our federal and state requirements, including greenhouse gas emission reduction requirements. In addition to that, we also have a number of other major activities that I'll touch on in the next slide, but those include improved equity analyses, scenario planning, our typical project solicitation and evaluation step, ongoing engagement throughout the 2 years, and then accessibility remediation. Going through each of those major activities, at least scenario planning, that'll be the item I touch on next, but this has been something that we typically do with a major update to our regional transportation plan. This last cycle, it actually informed the projects we were including in the plan, and so we are hoping to conclude that stage in Q1, Q2 of next year. We want to get started on financial planning, so we look at what's available in the region, not just DRCOG funding, but CDOT, RTD, local member governments, toll authorities, discretionary funding. What is all of the investment that's available in the region for transportation, and then what's actually available for projects. So we recognize that a lot of the funding that is already out there is already going to specific projects, or is already called for, potentially like debt service or just programs that you've already established in your own processes. Candidate projects is where we anticipate going out for a project solicitation and evaluation phase. What are the priorities that our partners want to have in the plan? How are those being evaluated against our criteria? How are those changing from our last major update? And then that leads into our air quality and greenhouse gas modeling. So planning for 6 months to get through our modeling that's required to show federal air quality conformity and greenhouse gas emission reduction levels. We'll be developing the document in addition to our main document, which is about 200 pages. There's also about 19 different appendices, an executive summary, a web map, and an online database. So while we're updating the plan, we're also updating all those different constituent parts as well. And so there are parts of those that we can start updating sooner than others. So we do anticipate a significant amount of time to document development, especially in terms of accessibility remediation. We want to be doing public and stakeholder engagement throughout this 2-year-long process, but we do show at the end our official public hearing process, so going before our regional partners that are required and our official public hearing process, our 30-day public review period, and concluding with adoption of the next RTP in fall of 2026 to meet our federal deadline of winter of 2026. So a lot of major activities over the next 2 years to get us to December 2026. In addition to those major activities, there's also a lot more that we do during these 2 years. We still do have to be doing our annual mitigation action plan reporting as part of our GHG requirements, so we'll continue to do that every year. We have a number of definitions tasks that we take on. One is the development of a public engagement plan that is specific to this effort. We want to make sure that for this specific plan, we're reaching folks that we want to reach, that we're not overloading the region. There's a lot of plans already occurring in the region, some that DRCOG is doing, some that our partners are doing. We want to make sure to leverage those where possible and not cause fatigue for our region's residents. Our regional roadway system is the network that is comprised of roadways in the region that are for eligible projects in our regional transportation plan and our transportation improvement program. We set this network at the beginning of our plan process, so that way when we go into our solicitation process, we know where projects can be pulled from, can be proposed from, so that's our eligible network in the region. An equity analysis is new. We do have an equity index now at DRCOG. We've piloted it with the TIP. We've included it in our latest Title VI implementation plan. We'd like to see what an improved version of that looks like for the regional transportation plan and being able to use that in the solicitation and evaluation phase for the plan. So not just doing it at the end, once we've got our investments decided and what are the outcomes coming out of that from an equity lens, how can we use that on the front end? And then we'll also just be doing some work on our existing and committed and vision projects, what all is out there that we need to show in the plan but might not be done yet, what is our full needs for the region. And then I touched on our financial planning tasks. We'll be working with all of our partners to determine what's the funding that's out there, what's reasonably expected, what can we put on projects, and what do we know is already called for in other programs. Just a quick highlight, there has been a number of changes since 2020. The one I'll touch on in the next item is actually population and employment forecast, but we do expect the region to grow a little differently than what we thought 4 years ago. There are new federal and state financial resources available to our partners, to the region that didn't exist prior. How does that line up with our pretty aggressive assumptions for financial resources in our previous RTP. We have a new regional BRT partnership that's been making progress on a number of those corridors. Like I mentioned, there's a number of new plans in place that we didn't have prior. Our TDM strategic plan, our RTO&T strategic plan, a regional housing needs assessment, and then we do have some ongoing and upcoming updates to our active transportation plan, our regional multimodal freight plan, and our coordinated transit plan. So how can we leverage each of these engagement, major milestones, any of the policies, priorities that they establish to leverage in our regional transportation plan? Some next steps that we're looking forward as staff, we've already provided notice to our partners at CDOT and CDPHE as required by our GHG IGA. We want to continue exploring scenario analysis options. We've started conversations internally. We've had a conversation with the Transportation Advisory Committee. The next item will be on scenarios for the RTC as well. We want to provide some deliverable specific updates when appropriate. So our regional roadway system, our project definitions, our equity analysis as those get going. We'll be doing outreach to our partners for that financial planning task. And then we want to continue coordination with CDOT on their own effort to update the 2050, an update to get to their 2050 statewide plan that is currently ongoing. That concludes the update presentation, Chair. Happy to take any questions.
Questions? Yes. Director Cook.
Is this on? Just quickly, are the new plans posted on the website? The TDM strategic plan, the regional housing needs assessment, and so forth. If somebody wanted to go look at those,
they are. Yeah. With the new website, they might be in new places, but they are all available on our website.
Great, thank you.
I'm going to go ahead and ask a question myself. I'm not only transportation, but in many areas, there's concern about federal funding. We have a new administration coming in. How does that work? I mean, we don't know, and it looks like on the timeline, you're looking at Q1 or Q2 of 2025. Probably, I don't know, doubtful that we'll know much of anything in the first 6 months. But what other, do we have people in Washington that report to us about that, or how does that work?
So we do have a lobbyist team that works with us, but for our financial planning task, we actually rely on CDOT's program distribution. So that's a joint effort with the MPOs to determine what are the resources available to the state, and then how different MPOs, DRCOG included, might receive part of those financial allocations. And so they have recently updated the program distribution out to 2050. One of our first steps will be using that and then adding to it with our partners' other financial resources, so RTDs, local member governments, E470s. So that's a long-term look at financial resources for the region. Another way that we also look at financial resources is discretionary. We rely on recent discretionary awards to the region through our transportation improvement program. So we know we're a pretty well-resourced region in terms of discretionary grants. We win quite a few, so we want to make sure that we're showing those reasonably in our financial plan. And so we do take some assumptions there just based on what we've seen historically in the region for discretionary funds. But we do recognize this is a 30-year plan, 20 or 30-year plan. There will be ebbs and flows, but we take a pretty balanced look. Over 30 years, what can we expect on average?
Great, thank you. Darius Pakbas.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just add on to that the program distribution that Alvin mentioned was taken to the commission into STAC the last couple of months. That gives an overview of what expected revenues from the federal government would be. And the assumption is until we know any specific changes, we'll keep current legislation moving forward from the federal side.
Great, thank you very much. Ron?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Ron Papsworth with DRCOG. That was all 100% absolutely correct. I think this planning process also gives the region the opportunity to have a conversation about the fact that our needs will always be beyond the resources that we expect to have, and at what level do we use this planning process and the priority setting process and the needs that we have to achieve the outcomes that we've all said we want to achieve through our transportation investments. Is there a conversation around not just relying on those resources that come at us externally, but opportunities to have a conversation among ourselves and with the region about perhaps some more local revenue to actually address those needs and expand on those resources and not be so reliant on sort of those external funding sources. So this planning process is an opportunity to have that conversation.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? None. Thank you, Alvin. Appreciate that. You're going to stay up there, though, and you're going to try and pull out of the RTP the section on scenario planning.
Thank you. So like I mentioned, we have started these conversations internally. We've had our first conversation with the Transportation Advisory Committee, but scenarios are one task that we've historically done here at DRCOG to help us get to our project solicitation and evaluation phase. Like I mentioned, this is one major activity. We've already started that effort. We hope to conclude Q1, Q2 of next year. That way we can have a healthy conversation on what our solicitation and evaluation process looks like here at the agency. I'm going to give a quick recap to our last scenario effort 4 years ago, touch on the latest population and employment forecast that we're seeing in the region now, and then we'll conclude with an opportunity, a Menti exercise for folk to give their own feedback on what are some of the changes they're seeing in their communities at their agencies that might impact how people move, how we grow as a region. Like I mentioned, I'll start with a recap of the last effort. This was 4 years ago when we first gave this presentation to our committees and board. It was about a 60 to 70 slide presentation. Y'all won't be getting that, don't worry. But if you do want to see a deeper dive, there is a full appendix on this effort as well. And so I'll just be giving a really quick, brief highlight of that. When we did our scenario work last cycle, these were really big what-if alternative futures. We didn't end up picking one. That's not how we've typically approached scenario work here at the agency. It's about asking some pretty big questions and how those impact mobility and growth in the region. So they were relative comparisons between each other and between a baseline. They were not rigorous. So we didn't end up choosing. We weren't trying to judge any particular scenario. It was more about understanding what are some of the trade-offs that occur if you make these decisions in the region. And ultimately, we wanted to make sure we had some guidance and direction as we developed our regional transportation plan. There were 2 land use scenarios, infill and centers, and 5 transportation scenarios, off-peak congestion, managed lanes, travel choices, transit, and automated and connected vehicles. Infill focused growth around 12% of the region's land area, centers around 3% of the region's land area. Off-peak congestion widened the interstates and made some improvements to key interchanges in the region. Managed lanes built out a managed lanes network across our 10-county area. Travel choices was about improving bicycle and sidewalk access across the region, increasing telework rates, and hopefully improving safety in the region. Transit built out fast tracks, added additional rail, built all the bus rapid transit lines in the BRT study, doubled transit frequency and made transit free. And then automated and connected vehicles was a squishy one for us, but what happens with greater, lost the word, more AVs and CVs on our roadways. We also did a couple combinations of those, and so we recognized that none of these just work by themselves. So what more might there be some synergies between each of them? So we combined our infill scenario with our travel choices scenario and our center scenario with our transit scenario. I'll show results from the transportation scenarios and then what happens when we start combining those with the land use scenario. But like I mentioned, again, these are very high level, very quick. But if you want more information, there's a full appendix on our RTP website that goes into the definitions behind all of these and some more results. These are all built the same in terms of the chart. 2020 is where we were back 4 years ago. 2050 was our baseline. And with this one, we actually didn't see a lot of difference in our off-peak congestion scenario. So those are actually combined into one bar as you look at that. Travel choices, managed lanes, and transit. For each of these, there's a MetroVision target tied to that. So we wanted to show how are we moving forward as a region with the adopted MetroVision targets that we already have. And so for our transportation scenarios, none of those reduce daily VMT per capita to the goal that we've set as a region, despite some pretty significant investments. The Same holds true in terms of our single occupancy vehicle mode share to work target. Again, none of our transportation scenarios get us to that target, despite, again, significant investments. We do see some movement when it comes to delay per capita, and that's related to our travel choices and managed lanes operations scenarios. But with those, one of the trade-offs then is just more VMT in the region, especially when you look at the managed lanes scenario. So what are those trade-offs we're comfortable with making as a region to meet our region's targets? When you start combining scenarios, that's where you start to see some significant reductions or significant movement in these changes from 2020. So for each of these, the gray bar is our 2050 baseline, where we thought we would be without further investment, further changes in the region. Green is our travel choices scenario by itself. Orange is our infill scenario by itself. And then blue is those two scenarios combined. You'll see our infill scenario, which is just a land use scenario, no further transportation investments in the region, is already having some pretty significant movement in the region in terms of VMT reduction and transit walk bike trips increase. And when we combine those, we see that further amplified. And then same thing with our combination scenario about centers and transit. Again, gray is that 2050 baseline we thought we would be at without further investment, further changes. Green is that transit scenario by itself. Orange is the centers scenario by itself. Again, you see a pretty big jump in both of these charts when you're just looking at a land use scenario by itself. But when you start to combine those with other factors like transportation and cost, you see that movement continue to be amplified. So what do we do with all that? You saw this slide earlier. We actually changed the project mix in our regional transportation plan. The first two we've always had in the plan. The bottom four we've had in our plan in a different way. But if what we were seeing in our scenario analysis work was these different projects help get us to our goals in a little different way, why aren't we asking about them and asking for them in our regional transportation plan? If the priorities we're hearing from our stakeholders and the public are for these different types of projects, how do we show them in the plan a little differently? And so for this last major update, we did include these 4 new project types in the plan in a way that we haven't before. So we asked our county subregional forums to give us a prioritized list of the projects that they wanted to see in the regional transportation plan from all of these different categories. It was up to them what they thought might be major, and we ended up going through our solicitation and evaluation process and including a larger mix of projects in ways that we haven't before in the RTP. And you saw this slide again earlier. We were able to tag that investment in new ways in the plan. You're able to open up our plan, open up our web map, find a line on a map that is a safety project, dedicated safety project, not a roadway operational project that has a safety component, but an actual safety project. And so that was new this last cycle for the regional transportation plan. Again, we've always had it in the plan. They were just maybe more as a program or a bucket of funding. So with that, knowing what we did with our scenario work last time, I'm going to shift us over to our latest population and employment forecast that we're seeing in the region. It might be a little bit of a confusing conversation, throwing a lot of different years out there, so I'll try and be consistent, but if you do have questions, please do ask. This is all compared to our 2050 that we expect that's currently in our regional transportation plan, so 2050 with old population and employment forecasts with our current investments in the plan. We do now expect there to be about 231,000 fewer people in 2050 compared to 4 years ago. We are still a growing region. That should be the message coming out of this. We're just not growing as fast. So instead of going to, 4.4 million, we'll be about 4.2 million. So still a growing region. We have a new tool available to us through our land use modeling, and we think it better represents the region's population, specifically the way the population ages. And so there are some differences in our aging cohorts with this new population and employment forecast. And because of that, we do see some changes in age, income, and workers per household. So I'll run through each of those on the next couple of slides.
All right, question from Ron Papsdorf.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, just to emphasize that first bullet point, when we do our land use, population, employment, demographic forecast for this region as part of our planning process, just want to emphasize, we start with estimates from the state demographer's office that's a control total for our region and a control total by county within our region. And then we use our own land use forecasting model to take a whole bunch of input about land uses, development patterns, and whatnot to then distribute that population employment demographic data out to more discrete specific analysis zones throughout the region to form our transportation modeling. But I wanted to emphasize it starts with estimates that we get from the state demographers office. One of the conversations we're having as part of our planning process this cycle is whether we want to bracket that a little bit. Because we know when we're looking at 20, 30-year forecasts, there's always some uncertainty about that. And we might want to think about maybe doing some sort of plus and minus sort of bands of estimates to see how much that might influence our decision-making about transportation needs and priorities.
Thank you, Ron. So each of these will be structured pretty similarly. The gray bar will be our 2050 population or employment, or whichever data point we're looking at, that we expected 4 years ago with our latest transportation investments in the RTP. And then the blue bar will be what we expect now with the latest forecast that we have available to us. I'll start with population. Like I mentioned, we do expect 5.2% fewer people in the region compared to 4 years ago. So again, this is compared to our 2050 baseline, essentially. And so with fewer people, there will obviously be fewer trips being made in the region. That also impacts jobs, so we do expect 7.1% fewer jobs in the region. Again, fewer trips being made, fewer work commute trips being made in the region. But again, the message being we are still a growing region, just a little slower than expected. Also able to look at age changes, and so this is where you start to see those more significant differences with our improved modeling. You look at the working age population, 18 to 65, that's a significant decrease, 16.4% fewer working age adults, and we see that mostly going over to our older adult population, so 65 years and older. With our better modeling that's available to us, we think we're reflecting the region better in the future, and so we are seeing that reduction in working age population, but shifting over to our older adult population. And obviously, fewer work trips, older adults take transit differently, travel differently, and so trips are being made differently in our model now. We're also able to look at workers per household. So again, with a larger older adult population, the significant change is in the households with no workers. So 43.5% additional households with no workers now. Again, trips are made differently in households with no workers, fewer work trips, fewer trips in general. When we look at income, the significant difference is in 70,000 to 150,000. With income, folk travel differently. So lower income populations rely on transit more, potentially use travel choice, mobility choices a little differently. Higher income, you're potentially looking at car ownership rates being a little different. So for each of these different income values, folk travel in our model differently, make choices differently in our model. So how does that impact the types of trips that are being made, the number of trips that are being made? And so with just changing our population employment forecast, having better modeling, we're able to see how this starts to flesh out around different categories and what some of those different trip impacts start to be. So I know those were percentages, bar charts. Also want to provide just a summary slide with what are those actual raw values. So compared to our previous 2050 forecast, our baseline forecast, we do expect fewer residents, 231,000 fewer residents, 212,000 fewer jobs, 130,000 additional households with no worker. So tying those raw numbers to those charts you did just see. Again, we can show different categories. So age, additional older adults is the major message coming out of these new population and employment forecasts. So that means fewer working age adults. It also means fewer children in our region. And then with income, you're also able to see additional households below the poverty line. And so with this latest population employment forecast, we can start to see how some of these trips change. So based on these changes, our new 2050 forecast compared to our baseline shows fewer person trips, just generally across all the different ways people travel in our region. But there are 5% fewer vehicle trips, 28% fewer transit trips, 14% fewer bike and pedestrian trips in the region. This is again 2050 compared to our 2050 baseline. This also results then in fewer vehicle miles traveled in the region. There's a slight decrease in VMT per capita in the region. There's less delay in the region. There's just less folk, there's less people traveling, so less delay. And so as we look at our new scenario work with these new population employment forecasts, we recognize that just with a smaller population, there will be lower traffic congestion in the future than we anticipated 4 years ago. Because we do have better tools available to us now, the population behaves a little differently. So there are more older adults, choices are being made a little differently in the model. And so just with these new tools, we do want to note that this upcoming scenario exercise isn't directly comparable to the last one, but we obviously do want to learn something from this effort. How can we make different project investment priorities, selections, evaluations in this next effort to continue to move our region forward and the goals that we've established through MetroVision and the RTP. So now is the part where we're going to do a Menti exercise. You've heard from us what we are seeing in terms of our population and employment forecast that we get from the State Demographer's Office, what we're getting out of our travel model. But we want to hear what y'all are seeing in your own communities, at your own agencies. What are some of the impacts you anticipate? And then we'll use that feedback, combine it with internal staff feedback, our Transportation Advisory Committee feedback, and future board feedback to help define what some potential scenarios could be this next cycle. So if you'll go to menti.com, no barcode, apologies, but menti.com, and then the code will be 98301356. Again, and that'll be menti, MENTI.com, and then the code you'll enter is 98301356. We have 6 questions for y'all, so we'll go through some of the larger themes that we've been asking our other committees. And then the first, once you're in, is what demographic shifts are likely to have the most significant impact on transportation needs in our region. You could even expand that to be the different ways we might grow in the region. And then, apologies, the code again is 98301356. We touched on one already, larger, older. So we've touched on one already, a larger, older adult population. Are there other demographic shifts that you're seeing within your communities at the regional level? You're having discussions in your own agencies to provide services with. What else should we be taking into consideration beyond older adults and a growing older adult population here? Aging population, household reduction, fewer workers, wealth transfer, fewer children, access to public transportation, non-driving adults by choice, aging in place with the lack of housing, job-home imbalances due to lack of affordable housing, persons with a disability, immigrant population.
And Alvin, are you planning to share these comments at some point?
Yeah, so we'll be synthesizing the feedback from all of our different committees and then coming back for a conversation on the scenarios that we're defining based on that feedback and how well they make sense for this upcoming plan effort.
Thank you.
Racial minority family growth, non-commute vehicle trips, more people on the edges. Okay. Like I mentioned, we have 6 questions, so I'm going to push us over to the next one. You might also be able to go by yourself. I'm not entirely sure. Okay, so I will move us to the next one. What emerging economic trends could reshape transportation demand and how the region grows? Increasing telework, housing affordability, less brick and mortar retail, artificial intelligence, more technology integration, automation, wages not keeping up with cost of living, telework cycles, less manufacturing, lower income future, new job centers not served on previously planned transit, for jobs, reduced sales tax, impacts of climate change on our economy, office vacancy rates, greater use of AI, Great, I'm gonna move us to question 3. What technological advancements should we consider as potential game changers? Folk are also welcome to verbalize their comment if they would prefer. Don't need to all use the Menti exercise, but we do want to make sure we're recording these responses as well and being able to cull through them a little easier, but you also are more than welcome to note them verbally as well. EV adoption, smart roadways, someone define ICE fueling for me? Yes, thank you. AI transit planning, AI system management in general, autonomous vehicles, greater use of apps, aerial vehicles, drone deliveries, tuning, energy available to move freight, AI. Go ahead and move us along. What changes in land use patterns are expected to influence our transportation needs and infrastructure? Urban development, infill and density, walkable cities, climate-driven shifts away from the suburbs and auto dependence, redevelopment of school sites, an interesting one. Smaller homes, single-family zoning transformations, sprawl into regional needs, making transit density near transit appealing to young folk with kids, older adults, for adult housing. Multi-generational housing. Good one. No parking, limited parking, redevelopment of 70s era corridor and commercial strips, infill development. I'll move us forward. Increased mixed-use zoning. But environmental changes could pose new challenges for transportation planning for growth in the region. Water availability. Climate-hardened properties being more expensive to construct, increasing housing costs, just more weather events in general. Battery disposal. Flood, fire. Increased grid requirements, climate refugees. Roadway durability. Electrification, mandates that are ahead of feasible solutions, extreme heat, increased energy demand, rising insurance, that's come up in a couple conversations. Move us, what potential disruptions or emergencies should we consider to foster resilience in our region? Civil unrest, water shortages, collapse of the federal government. Outages. Even aging infrastructure. Fire and flood at the urban wildland interface, economic decline, redundancy in our travel network. Longer summers, warmer winters. More and more severe fires and floods Food insecurity. All right, I lost track of counting questions, so I'm not sure if there's one more. There's not. So those are our 6 questions. We wanted to come before y'all, just like I've mentioned, we've gone before the Transportation Advisory Committee. We'll go before the board later this year to get feedback. But like you saw in the quick recap, we used our scenario results last time to inform the types of projects we were asking for in the plan. So we want to make sure that whatever we're developing this cycle still informs that list of projects. What are we asking for? What should we be asking for that we're not currently asking for? Should we be taking different policy stances in our RTP that we haven't before? And so we'll collect this feedback, compile it with all the different feedback we're getting from our committees and board, and start to define what some of those scenarios could look like. Last cycle, you saw they were really big what-if questions. You always hear, well, if you just did this, we would solve transportation in the region. So we tried that, and you saw what some of those outcomes were. So we want to see what can we test this time that's changed in our region to continue to refine our investment priorities in the region. And so like I mentioned, we will begin defining those potential scenarios based on that feedback and then come back before our committees and the board to affirm those scenarios so we can start modeling and start turning out results to see what we're actually seeing through this scenario exercise.
Questions? Was anyone surprised by the state demographer's forecast of reduced population? From the last projection, yeah. Correct, yeah. And I think I saw a history in the past of always increasing projections. So this is the first time, and it's, you know, the estimate for 2050, but this is the first time for Arapahoe County that has for years been talking about eventually becoming the most populous county, overtaking Denver population, and even using the number 800,000 population, and actually seeing that that may not be growing as fast as had prognosticated before. So, other questions? Yes. Director Guzman.
Just a question about the engagement with external stakeholders. A large region, there's also one of the populations that is going to continue to grow. Work and care children, I think, is what it's listed as under the demographer's office, is the minority population. How are you planning to reach out to them specifically, as they may not speak English and they might need additional resources to be able to participate in this? Also might need to be invited to this type of stakeholdering because their concerns, I can imagine from a variety of points of view, will be very different from what the non-Spanish, non-immigrant, perhaps non-minority population of the region would be concerned with, as they face growing families with job losses and loss of schools and potentially different economic outlooks for what is in front of them. Have a plan for that?
Yep, so last cycle we tried out what we called a civic advisory group. That was made up of representatives from folk who haven't been involved in our process before. So communities of color were one group that we invited. We do want to resurrect that in some form for this upcoming update effort, so another civic advisory group. We also want to leverage just the engagement that's also already occurring. My counterpart, Nora Kern, who leads our community-based transportation planning work and our corridor work, is doing a lot more on-the-ground engagement with some of those communities, and so where we can leverage those to potentially ask some questions more directly to them and not have to just do a general region-wide survey that's more rich feedback with those we want to leverage. And so part of this effort is developing our own public engagement plan just for the RTP and figuring out what all is already occurring in the region that we can plug in on and that are already reaching communities that we know we maybe don't always get the best feedback from on. And so those are 2 ways that we're looking at doing it this upcoming effort.
Jacob? I'm sorry, Aaron.
All right, I just wanted to kind of expand on Alvin's excellent answer, but just add a couple things.
As part of Nora Kern's work and as part of our work generally, we have been pioneering some engagement techniques with the Federal Highway Administration, things like incentives. We're even looking at childcare, providing food at meetings. So again, some of these outreach activities to reach some of those populations that we know can't just come to a 10 a.m. type of meeting, right? And we're also updating our public engagement plan as we speak, actually, to incorporate some of those strategies and continue to evolve in terms of some of our techniques, both in person, on the ground, and community, as well as virtual, based on what we've learned during the pandemic.
Thank you, Jacob. Erin?
Thank you. I wanted to piggyback on this as well, just to ask about when we say kind of communities that we're not regularly hearing from, do we have data, like how do we understand, do we clearly understand who that is, so that all of these things that we talk about doing, which happens in all planning processes, right? Like, how do you get more people at the meetings and more engagement? But I'm just curious, kind of, do we have information that helps us kind of specifically target certain things, to your point about language, versus just kind of generally saying, as again, all of us do in all of our organizations, like, we're going to provide childcare, we're going to have translation services, we're going to have things at different times of the day, just, you know, making sure that we're really getting the most out of that.
So we do have a number of resources that we lean on. One is our limited English proficiency plan, just to have a general idea at the regional level, knowing sometimes that data is not the best once you get into particular languages that we rely on. We also rely on our Area Agency on Aging staff. They do a lot of work with older adults, refugee older adults, so that's a community that they have a greater handle of and get beyond just Spanish as a language. There are other languages in the region and tighter communities in the region that we could be reaching out to. And then through our equity index, we also developed a list of community-based organizations, so using trusted leaders already in those communities and not just going to John and Jane Doe in the community that already have that relationship. And so when we developed that equity index, we made sure to reach out to what was a diverse range and proportional range of different types of TBOs that are in the region. So we can also rely on that to help with more targeted feedback, especially when we get to the point of requesting membership on our civic advisory group.
Director Silverstein.
Oh, thank you. And back to the conversation about the change in the projected growth, you know, going what I would call is a bit lower, you know, knowing that we have, you know, significant populations that are projected to be coming into our region. I think it's a good thing. You know, this region has experienced such dramatic growth as, you know, a native of Colorado, and many of you all are longtime residents. You know, that kind of uncontrolled growth, you know, unmanaged growth is, you know, brings with it the problems, brings with it the benefits too. And we're all in a model of thinking that all growth must be good growth, because that must mean better income, better, you know, revenue for the state, whatever that might be. But this provides an opportunity to take maybe a more realistic look at our future and say, how do we deal with the growth that we're projecting, and a lower growth rate can help make some of these problems a bit more manageable. So I, for one, am pleased that the growth rate is down ever so slightly.
Oh, I agree, and you can see even the reduction of single occupancy vehicle share to work even goes down with the numbers. So there's a silver lining.
All these bring challenges and benefits, no matter what the scenarios, for sure. Thank you.
Director Papsdorf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to piggyback a little bit on Mr. Silverstein's statement, one thing I think I want to queue up for all of you, one challenging conversation we may have as a result of this work is around the state's greenhouse gas emission reduction rule. Because if you recall, the greenhouse gas reduction rule sets out a fixed reduction amount from a baseline. And so it's one thing if that baseline is sort of what was expected at the time that rule was adopted, and then the reduction levels are calculated from that, and we get some benefit, in air quotes, from sort of the lower growth rates that we're projecting now compared to what were expected to happen when that rule was adopted and when our first complying plan was adopted. If we have to re-baseline based on these new forecasts and then achieve that same amount of greenhouse gas emission reductions, which is in million metric tons of reduction, not a percentage reduction, we're going to be in trouble. And so I want to queue up that conversation. We're going to have a conversation about how that plays with sort of the world we're in today versus where we were 3-4 years ago and our planning process in relation to the state greenhouse gas rule. So there may be some challenging conversations to come around that issue.
Thank you, Ron. Erin Clark.
Thank you again. So now piggybacking, yes, on this population question, and I will say up front, if you don't have an answer today, I understand, but I'm always looking to contextualize the data that we have. And so in understanding that our projections in 2050 are lower than what they were originally projected to be, do we have any sense of how that looks across our region, or like, is that true in other locations, just from the perspective of trying to understand, like, did we overproject in, thinking urban areas were going to look a certain way and actually the growth is shifting? Just wondering kind of how some of that broader perspective could help us also understand from a planning perspective.
So at a national level, we are seeing slower growth just nationally. Colorado still is one of the fastest growing states, even with this slower growth that we're anticipating. So even with the 200,000 fewer that we're expecting, we are still on the higher end nationally. But we are seeing this slower growth trend generally across the region, the nation.
Ron?
Just a more detailed description. I think one thing that our land use planners or development planners are working through is our land use forecasting. So remember, we start with the state demographers, sort of control totals at the regional level and the county level, and then we use a forecasting model to distribute that across the region. I think we don't quite have the answers to your questions yet about how much are we seeing in terms of shifts of population, different growth rates in different parts of the region. I think we're still trying to grapple through and figure out sort of what impacts may or may not occur as a result of House Bill 1313 from last sessions, for instance, which related to housing development and zoning around transit corridors and transit stations, how both our local jurisdictions react to that, but also what impact that may or may not have on future development patterns. So we're still working through a lot of those details, much more to come on that.
Mayor Mills?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Alvin, will you go back? I think it's 4 slides back. Thank you. So let's be clear on this projection here. We're not going back in population. We're just going back from the projected of the 2050 model. I just want to make sure that's clear to everyone in this room here. I mean, when it says like 7% fewer person trips across the models, I mean, it doesn't mean there's 7% less coming in 2050. It's just less than what we had projected. And so I just want to make sure that's clear. There's still a need for improving our infrastructure, improving our transportation needs, our public transportation, our roads, our bike lanes, et cetera, et cetera. So we can't take the focus off that.
Good point. Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Yes. Michael Guzman.
Thank you. So on the previous slides where you're talking about the mix of options that you were looking at, how that impacts things, you said something that caught my attention. Transportation is not free by any stretch of the imagination for anybody, even those providing service. And as much as I would love to wave a magic wand and Harry Potter that into reality, that's not reality. Somewhere, somehow, it has to be paid for, right? Don't build things for free. We just went through the tip adjustments. We don't provide services for free. Somebody always pays that bill. Somehow we have to have funding for it. And so my question is, given the idea that free transportation is what was presented, where is the free coming from? Because we offer zero fare for students right now, and that is funded by taxpayers. And it will continue to be funded by the state legislature as long as they continue to renew that commitment to do it under the Senate bill that was passed last year, right? And so to get to free is a concerning word for me because I don't know where the bill's going, who's footing it, and who's paying for it. Not that I don't believe we should have it, don't get me wrong, but if that was the biggest indicator of change for modal shift, and we're all leaders in this room, let's not kid ourselves, right? If I go to you and I hand you a bill and say, this is what you got to pay for your county, your city, you wanted it, we gave it to you, are you going to pay that bill? Where are you coming up with the funds for it, right? And it's the same thing for education, it's the same thing for medical, all of that. Perfect world, we wouldn't have to pay for it, we would just be able to walk in and do what we need to do. But that's not the reality on the ground either. And so while we're having the commitment and the conversation about how we make and improve these systems going into the future for a larger population, that particular word caught my attention and was flagged. So what is the conjecture there about providing that free service? Can you talk to that?
Yes, if you're referencing the transit scenario, one of the components of that was free transit, fare free, zero fare. So that's a way we're able to change just factors in the model, but tied to that, we also, for each of these, developed cost estimates for them. And so part of that that conversation during the scenario development was what's the cost associated with actually providing zero fare across the region for that scenario. So that's one way we try to calculate that, is that we recognize it's not free. There's lost revenue, the service is still being provided. There is still a cost being borne at the regional level by the agency. But the scenarios were just larger, big what ifs. We were not going to build out a full managed lanes network in the region in the next 30 years. We recognize on the transit side, we're not going to double transit frequency, build out fast tracks, add rail, put down 20 BRTs. They really were just trying to be big what ifs. We always hear from folk, if you just did this, you're going to solve it. And so we tried that with each of the different modes. And so we tried to capture it in the cost estimation we did for it. One way we could capture it in an actual financial planning exercise, if it moved forward in some way, would be through like a program allocation in our financial plan. So we would rely on our partners at that point to show us, this is your revenue that's available, this is how much we think is already going to go to this program just to keep it up and running over the next 20, 30 years. And then for that, that allocation is called for and isn't available to pull from for projects. So for the last cycle, it was a really high-level cost estimate. We tried to take it into account for this effort. If it does become in some way a thing that we test, we'll do that again, but we can also show it programmatically if it truly becomes a priority for the region. We want to show transit-free somehow in a program allocation in our financial plan. But that's following conversations with CDOT, RTD, our local governments, a full solicitation evaluation process. Last cycle, we met with CDOT and RTD staff weekly for about 2 months just to work through all of the project priorities that we heard from our partners and county forums. And so those were long, difficult conversations sometimes. Each agency has different priorities, but we tried to get to a consensus around those. And then those still do go before our committees and the board before anything's officially finalized.
Thank you. I am often reminded at RTD as a director that we need to manage expectations and be realistic. And as much as I love the big ideas, there is a reality we have to attend to on our street, right? When you walk out your front door, there's a reality there, and we all deal with it. And so I'm just asking that question because it from the beginning, you posited through the video need versus reality for fiscal responsibility, and we all share that. And so I'm just trying to seek some understanding there about what that looked like. So if it's just what's possible, great, but what's possible also does need to come back down to earth with the reality of what we have and where we're at.
Yes. Commissioner Adams.
First of all, listen, thanks for providing this data. This is very interesting to me. Lots of input, lots of data points that you've got here. I'm just curious on what is the time frame for when this gets put back into the mixer and we get another look at some summary data regarding what all of this means in terms of the changes. So what's the timeline for when and I know this is constantly an iterative process, so it's not like there's an answer here, because no sooner than you run your model, we're going to get the changes that we know are likely to occur. So what's the next update for us once you've run this through?
So related to the population employment forecast, you'll see this again through our scenario results that we'll be showing. Whatever those scenarios end up being, what do we see coming out of the model with the latest population employment forecasts? There is a task just related to RTP development, where we do ask our committees and board, related to Ron's point, county control totals. We need to make sure that those are set in our region that we can then use in our modeling. And then we use that for our final piece, which is our air quality greenhouse gas modeling. So you'll see these particular data points come through a number of different milestones over the next couple of years.
We might see some additional update on all of this if it's running through a model of some sort. I just assume we'd see that within months, if anything, but maybe I'm mistaken about that.
Yes, there will be more results with this scenario work by Q2 of next year. So these are just high-level summaries that we're able to quickly pull out of our travel model with the latest employment population forecasts. But once we get into defining the scenarios, just as last cycle, we'll look at other metrics that we want to be comparing each of these to. And so these are just high-level summary changes. Over the next few months, you will see more results coming out of this scenario work using these forecasts and different metrics that might be tied to either our RTP priorities, Metro Vision targets that we've already set, other priorities that might be established in other plans that we have at the agency.
There's no doubt that with what we're looking at in terms of what may come out of the next administration in D.C., plus what's likely to occur even in our own state with the budget plans and preparations and just life in general, you know, whatever it is, it's going to be very interesting over the next 12 months as to what we all have to deal with.
Dr. Papsdorf?
Just to amplify that, look, this is a pretty intense planning effort that we go through, particularly over the next year, right? Overall, it's about 2 years, but as Alvin pointed out, a lot of that at the tail end is putting the document together sort of after major decisions have been made. It's sort of the public hearing process and all of that. But the big planning efforts really are over the course of the next 12 months or so. Expect to see some level of updates from us about the RTP planning process nearly monthly, if not monthly, at RTC as we kind of go through major milestones, have new information, have sort of touch points and questions or process.
Shelley Cook.
Oh, goodness, that was empty. So just a question. One time I had the chance to hear a presentation about the Minneapolis Skyway system, if you've been there. And one thing they said was there was one particular linkage that ended up being pivotal. It made the system a system, and they saw use skyrocket. Does that concept apply to our networks, whatever bikeway or roadway, or do you have a way of identifying especially critical connections in the systems that you're planning that way?
Yeah, I think it's a little different for each of our modal plans. Our active transportation plan is currently being updated, and one of those activities will be just like a gap analysis. So we do that a number of different ways through our plans. Our travel model is able to potentially show different linkages at a regional level based on the network that we use. I would just say it depends on the plan. I don't know if Ron or Jacob wanted to add a little to that. In terms of like Skyway specifically, I'm not sure that's something that...
it was just, I was wondering if there's a similar concept in the planning we do that allows us to prioritize those or identify.
Yeah, Director Cook, I think it's a really interesting analogy to tie into. I'm not sure we've thought about it that way, but it's an interesting way for us to maybe go back and think. I know what we have been thinking about is sort of what are the big regional connections or the big corridors, right? What are the centers of activities and what are the best ways to connect those? And that might lead us to some thoughts or discussion along the lines that you're talking about using that sort of Skyway analogy. Yeah, it's just an interesting way to think of it that I think we hadn't really quite considered at this point.
Jacob?
Dr. Cook and everyone, that it is a really interesting analogy. And I will say one thing that we have been focused on over the last 4 years or so is with the previous regional transportation plan and the work that came with it, through our complete streets work, through our equity work, through our safety work and our high injury network, we have been looking for what I call those unicorn corridors. So if we can find those corridors that they're on the high injury network, they're in an equity area, they're part of our complete streets, you know, they check those boxes in some other ways. So I think that gets a little bit at your concept. I think we'd want to think about that a little bit more. But yes, in general, we have we have been trying to focus kind of our planning on those corridors and areas, I should say, where we can affect the most change through our various plans and our various tools. So thank you for that thought.
Any other questions? Thank you, Alvin. It's very interesting, as Adam said. It's going to be interesting, and I think that's an Irish curse, maybe interesting times. But we're in our interesting times here. We're going to move on to administrative items. This is member comment and other matters. First up is Colorado Department of Transportation report.
I'll defer to Vice Chair, Commission Vice Chair Adams.
Commissioner Adams.
A couple of comments. Our regularly scheduled CDOT meeting takes place tomorrow. We have a number of really interesting things that we're trying to grapple with. Probably we're going to spend a lot of time in our workshop in this meeting talking about rail. Talking about rail as in front range rail, and talking about what we intend to do with the property we made a strategic decision about in 2019 and 20 called Burnham Yards. And we also have an initiative to talk about the Moffett Tunnel. We're going to spend a lot of time, maybe several hours, with a combined meeting of both our CTIO board, which for those of you who may or may not know is a joint board made up of CDOT commissioners as well as some appointees by Commissioner Cook and I both sit on the CTI board as well as our CDOT commissioners. We're going to have a joint meeting so we can bring everyone up to speed and get all of us on the same page regarding what we're going to do about our engagement and involvement with front range passenger rail, what we're going to do about some renegotiated or newly negotiated Moffett Tunnel, and then what is our long-term plan regarding Burnham Yards. When we bought Burnham Yards, it was with the expectation that the rail bed, and it would be a sort of cornerstone. We didn't expect that we would use all of about the 55 acres that are there. We thought we needed about 15. Now, because of where things stand with front range passenger rail, we're not convinced that it has a strategic place in our long-term plans, but it's still very valuable and very strategic property, and so we have to figure out what we can do with it. And that's a big part of our meeting. The other part of our meeting is we're going to spend time talking about some routine things called our budget amendment that we need to make for 24 and 25, but then we get into the budget for 25 and 26. And that's where things will really get, interesting as well, because, we're grappling with the same problems. We don't know how likely some things are to change in some significant ways to a number of our plans regarding things we want to do in terms of the ongoing maintenance of the system, new projects we put in our 10-year plan, as well as all the initiatives we want to have around multimodal and climate and other things. So it's going to be very interesting. I'm going to stop there and let the others that might have some other comments, but those are, I think, the major things we have on our agenda for the next couple of days.
Commissioner Cook?
Yeah, thank you. And I'm glad you brought up Burnham Yard. It's really an important discussion we're going to have. And I think the report that we've seen was done in consultation with RTD, for example. I did want to note that in terms of passenger rail, there was the Mountain Rail project that would take rail up to Steamboat and Craig. That the second of the 3 public meetings were held. This one for the metro area in Arvada, and it was very well attended, 170 people. So there was quite a bit of interest in that, and I'll be anxious to see what the December meeting shows with more information about potential station sites, et cetera, as part of the SDP. And then one thing to note is it's a Crash Responder Safety Week, and CDOT has lost 2 people recently, the highway maintainers, Trent Umberger and Nathan Jones, and then we had in Golden just a week ago the loss of an officer, plus another officer was gravely injured. So I just wanted to bring that to light because it really is pretty hazardous being alongside the road with all the distracted driving and so forth. So I appreciate the safety, the emphasis on safety that's carrying through all the planning here, as well as in the communities. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Darius.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll add on to what the commissioner said, that the only other thing on the agenda is, of course, the interchange application for Greeley merge. So just wanted to mention that. From the staff perspective, we're continuing to work on our 2050 statewide plan, primarily working with our rural partners to help develop their rural plans, but we are expecting to have the conversations with our MPO partners, including DRCOG here in the next couple of months as we develop the 10-year plan. Which should be adopted in December of 2025. So we're about a year out, but expect that out there. And the only other thing is a minor plug, which I think this may be coming to the DRCOG TAC, is the non-attainment enterprise has a transportation grant program that's NOFO that's out and available, only available for folks in the non-attainment areas, which includes DRCOG and the North Front Range. So more to come, but happy to answer any questions for those local member governments. And just at a very high level, if the project's eligible for CMAQ, it's eligible for this program. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
It's good to
I'll make
know.
one thing.
Yes, Commissioner Adams.
I failed to mention, and this is something I think comes to my attention more as a, I guess as a resident than anything else, and this is our BRT initiatives. And what I've come in contact with I've talked to merchants in the Colfax that are impacted by the Colfax BRT, and where I attend church, the Colorado Boulevard BRT is likely to be of some interest. This is getting a lot more attention and interest by our constituents, and I just bring that to this group's attention to say, we cannot under-communicate and allow for involvement in this. I had people at my church talking about, well, they're going to take Colorado Boulevard and they're going to just put a middle-of-the-lane solution, and you have to explain to people that's not decided upon. Part of the whole initiative is to allow people to understand what the plans are, and there are lots of options. We're early enough in it. But I just bring that up to say, as I was thinking about this, I didn't comment on BRT, but I do sense a great deal of interest in BRT initiative and confusion about whose project is it? Is it RTD? Is it the city of Denver? Is it CDOT? And there are different answers depending upon whether you're talking about Colfax or you're talking about Colorado Boulevard or federal. There are different answers. I just bring that to you, the groups.
Thank you very much. I've experienced that myself too, asking questions about that. CDOT, anything else? All right, we're going to move on to RTD. Deborah?
Yes, I'll start and then yield the floor to board members that are in attendance. So first and foremost, want to express my gratitude as relates to election night. Voters across the region overwhelmingly approved ballot measure 7A. It was 71% voter passage rate. And what's so intriguing about it, that it really showcased, in my humble opinion, the importance of transportation to the region. And when we talk about 7A, just for everybody's edification, it exempts RTD from Tabor revenue and spending limits. So as we go forward, this enables us to continue focusing on the Denver metro area's current and future mobility needs. And so as I segue into the next element that I want to touch upon, it has to do with our January service change. Some of you may be aware that we have service changes 3 times a year, traditionally January, May, and August, as it relates to seasonal ridership, as well as providing the dedicated individuals that comprise the agency an opportunity to bid on work shifts. And in those times, it gives us an ability to make adjustments and be able to provide more services if applicable. So with that as a backdrop, just last week, our Operations Safety and Security Committee members approved a recommended action that was put forward to them for a January 2025 service change. And in doing so, it really increases different elements of service. It adheres to what we had put forward in what we would call in the transit industry as a comprehensive operational analysis that has been branded for RTD as a system optimization plan. Among the notable changes, increases the spans of service and service frequency with bus routes and the reinstatement of 15-minute headways on the E&H light rail lines. This is in part with the influx of additional people power that we have. It's critically important. Oftentimes when I engage, people are thinking, oh, you hire operators. Well, we have bus operators, train operators, and train engineers, but while they're critically important, there's other positions that we need as well to ensure that we can deliver the services of which people come to rely on. And so as we look at this, also in addition to the rail maintenance that had happened throughout the course of the summer, basically by moving forward and investing in our state of good repair, this really enables us to be in a position to increase service. And the Board of Directors will consider this at the last meeting of the year, which will be December 3rd. Additionally, it was last Tuesday, the Finance and Planning Committee approved unanimously staff's recommendation as relates to the fiscal year 2025 budget, which is a $1.2 billion. That really has a strong emphasis on our strategic priorities being community value, customer excellence, employee ownership, and financial success, but drilling down a little bit more into various strategic initiatives, which are state of good repair, people power, welcoming transit environment, and our customer and community connections. On an annual basis, we do various surveys, not only of our customers, but the community as well as our employees, and we identify aspects from those opinions, perceptions, and attitudes that we're able to draw through those surveys and identify key drivers, and recognizing that certain elements boil down to activity centers and people needing mobility options to get them there. The focus of our budget revolved around those elements, and we intend to have a high laser-like emphasis on customer and community connections. Additionally, the agency is now in the final stages of its facility fleet and transition plan. Last week, that was presented to the board for their edification. And just so everybody's aware, when we talk about zero emission technologies and alternative fuels, it's critically important. Everybody wants to say, oh my gosh, let's go to a different propulsion system. It's for naught if you don't have facilities in which you can maintain those assets in which you're procuring. It's more or less an entirely different business model. And especially as we look at where we are here in the Front Range, we're limited in certain arenas relative to what type of alternative fuels that we can leverage. And so with the Facilities and Fleets Transition Plan, we want to ensure that we have the facilities, because I believe our youngest facility was constructed in the 80s. And while I still think that's young in my mind, it really isn't. And so part of a holistic strategy is to incrementally replace our clean diesel buses. And as we look at what may lie ahead, we could very well be looking at hybrid models as we look at the evolution of the technology, and not to mention that there's only 2 original equipment manufacturers that are eligible within the entire country to basically manufacture zero-emission vehicles, because we have to adhere to Buy America and Build America. So that's incredibly important too. So I just wanted to provide that context, because we are committed. We already have a sub-fleet of 36 battery electric buses, but when we did that sub-fleet that operates along the mall, we didn't necessarily have a facility. We made some modifications to adjust in reference to delivering service. But if this is going to be a wholesale approach, which we're committed to quite naturally, we have to do it with intention and purpose. And then rounding out with some good news, RTD announced just last week about a campaign in which we are encouraging employees as well as customers to stuff a bus. And we have branded this program as RTD Gives, and it's benefiting the Broomfield-based nonprofit, A Precious Child, which will collect essential warm clothing for children and adults during the winter months. And so the Precious Child program partners with 300 different agencies to serve those in need within RTD service area. So the campaign runs through mid-December with donation drops-off available at locations around the district. And what we intend to do is basically on Saturday the 14th, fill up that bus and deliver it to the Precious Child entity. And then what we're asking for are new unused winter clothing such as coats, gloves, scarves, socks, and sweaters that have not been worn. And this really, I would say, amplifies RTD's mission in reference to making lives better through connection. So with that, I'll yield the floor to the directors that are present to see if they have any additional information to add for the betterment of this body. Thank you.
Director Guzman?
Thank you. 7A, thank you very, very much. That's a vote of confidence and trust in RTD, and I appreciate it as your elected officials, your fiduciary responsibility. It also comes with a commitment that we need to do our jobs and do it well. And I don't think that's missed on any of the directors that are sitting on the board currently who will be departing at the end of this month, or the directors that were elected to join the board in the future year. Made a promise, we need to keep it, you need to hold us accountable, but we also want to say thank you for the support because we weren't sure what was going to happen with that one when we referred it to the voters. The budget does come before us December 3rd for the year 2025, and there's a lot in there. I have the privilege of sitting as vice chair on the finance committee, and it's taken a lot of work and a lot of adjustments and a lot of argument and a lot of discussion to get it done. But it was handled very well this year, and there is a lovely book that gives you quite a bit of narrative information around those numbers. So if you want to know what that money is going to, what has been used, what we're looking at next year, I would highly suggest looking that up on the RTD website. We will welcome 7 new directors to the board and one returning director to the board in January. And so things are going to change drastically at RTD. It's the time of year to do it. So just kind of pay attention to what's going on. The January service increases were already discussed. I do want to mention one thing. We have fully implemented live look-in cameras on all of our buses for safety purposes, and we are working on increasing that capacity on all of our rail cars, and that is continuing into next year. We want to make it as welcoming and safe an environment for everybody as possible. So to that regard, you can always use the RTD safety app to report either by text or to be able to link directly to the RTD Transit Police, and you will never ride alone, as my friend Director Tisdale says. Finally, as a personal mention, you know, RTD is the loving, careful landlord of Denver's Union Station through the help of the Downtown Denver Partnerships and the taxpayers. And so it is my great privilege as the director of District C, in which Union Station resides, to invite everybody to the grand illumination at Denver Union Station on November 29th, beginning at 5 p.m. And let's turn on the lights in the dark of winter and have a good time in our front room as a region. Thank you.
Thank you, Director. Director Whitmore? Nothing? Director Soroy? I have a question. When do your new directors, and I assume there's an onboarding process, do they get sworn in on a certain date? Is that?
It will be the first meeting of the year. I am not certain of that date yet, but they will go through their onboarding orientation. There's some preliminary work, and then there is continuing training that will need to be done post their swearing in.
Deborah?
There will be a special board meeting that's happening on Tuesday, January 7th, at 5:30 p.m. The purpose of that is to swear in the new officers, the board members, excuse me, and then to elect officers. Then there will be an executive committee meeting on Thursday, January 9th, at noon, at which time there will be committee appointments with the newly elected directors and those returning board members as well. Relative to the onboarding, just a couple of things. On Friday, December 6th, new board members will come in for an orientation relative to the various departments that comprise the agency. Members of my leadership team and key managers, in addition to me, will be meeting with them. And then prior not prior, subsequent to that, after the special board meeting on the 7th, there will be another session that's being held with general counsel as it relates to the obligations and responsibility and fiduciary responsibilities that they will have to take into consideration with their role in office, which happens on the 8th of January. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we'll move on to Regional Air Quality Council Report, Executive Director Silverstein.
Oh, thank you. And no big announcement outside of my team is putting the final touches on a grant application for monies from the EPA. And for anyone who's ever applied for a federal grant, oh my gosh, the hoops that one must jump through. So we're struggling, muscling through all of the requirements, and the requirements are in place for, I'm sure good reason. But it is an eye opener about how difficult that process is. And so we're applying for $18 million to predominantly fund our lawn and garden electrification programs. That popular modem pollution program at our office is a really important effort to reduce emissions from a highly polluting category, one that we don't normally think about as a significant source, but it turns out that it is. And so we hope to get that approval. You know, we're spending a lot of time and effort and money to get an application put together. And this kind of circles back to the conversation earlier. With the new administration and federal funds, what's going to happen? Well, we can only apply and hope that what we've heard is the EPA is working hard to get approvals out by the end of this calendar year so that at least they're allocated under the law. It was under the infrastructure bill and the federal climate legislation. So these monies were approved, but the new administration has indicated they're going to claw these monies back. And so we just hope with allocation, with the commitment of the federal government to fund an effort, that those funds will actually be, if we're approved for some or all of these monies, that we'll actually receive the monies. We heard from the former administrator of the EPA in a meeting last week that typically those monies aren't secure unless a check has been cut. So I don't know what that means in the federal government lingo, but we likely won't have a check cut by January 20th. But we'll see how fast EPA and the Biden administration is working to get these monies out the door. So that was just a bit of a preview on federal funding and the what if, and we can only plan for what we can plan for. And if monies are pulled back or the commitment is rescinded, that's not a good show of faith by the federal government. But we're in different times now, so we just hope that we're successful in our grant. And I need to give my staff a day off just for the pain and suffering they're going through and putting all this together. But thank you.
Thank you very much. That's just not cool. I'll just make an announcement that Arapahoe County also was successful in passing a revenue retention measure, and so and I got reelected. So you got me for another 4 years. Thank you. All right. If you need parking tickets, they're up here with Cam. Is there anything else for the good of the group? Yes, Director Papsdorf.
Sorry, the next meeting is December 17th. Given this month of December, we are considering having the December meeting virtually. More to come. Don't count on it just yet, but we're looking at that.
All righty. Thank you, everyone. Travel safely. We're adjourned.